We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic threw their plans against us.
Prior to your abduction, did you believe in UFOs or any sort of alien life form?
All things unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Hello, all you unexplained ones out there. Thank you for joining us. We are so lucky to have with us on this show Dr. Kevin Knuth. He is a leading physicist. He is known for his pioneering work in Bayesian analysis, artificial intelligence, and astrophysics. Currently, he is working with many other researchers on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and he's also dedicated much time looking into the areas of exoplanet detection. And what a timely moment to have you on our show, as we have some breaking UAP UFO news to share with the audience. We'd love to do a deep dive in that. We're also going to take a look into some of your past and current research. So Dr. Knuth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So just today, Dr. Mounts showed me a video that was released. Was it last night on TMZ? Is that what you said, Tim?
Yes, last night. Brand new TMZ UFO documentary. I believe this premiered on Tubi, T-U-B-I.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about what is in this video and where it came from.
So I'm going to set this up, and this is courtesy of Jeremy Corbell, and I believe the documentary is called UFO Revolution. And apparently this is over Iraq in October 2018, a joint military operations base. And I'm going to just pull it up now and let everybody see this. This is known as the Jellyfish UFO, and once you see it, we'll know why. And this is breaking as of last night, courtesy of Jeremy Corbell. And if you're listening on our audio version, we are seeing what looks like a big gelatinous, maybe blob, jellyfish type looking thing moving across the sky.
It almost looks like a bad older movie with terrible graphics is kind of what I get from this video. But you can tell that it's going over what seems to be some type of military facility or war zone, floating through the air, hovering with seemingly no form of propulsion.
Right. And interestingly, they say that this jellyfish UFO was observed for about 17 minutes, and then it went into the water. Unfortunately, there's no video of this incident. It stayed under the water at some point until it reemerged and shot off at an extreme rate of speed beyond the optical scope of the observation platform. It says it's officially classified as UAP. Its intent and capability are unknown. Some additional details here. As I said, it displayed transmedium capability, so it went from air to water and back out, and then exhibited controlled descent and ascent out of the water. The UAP displayed low observability, and Kevin, this is what I found super interesting. And it reminded me of you. We've seen you in a tear in the sky. The UAP was not visible with night vision and appeared to jam the targeting capability of the optical platform. Now, when you were on a tear in the sky, y'all filmed something in the sky that you could see on one camera, but you could not see on another.
Yeah,
so let's get all your thoughts on this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, all right, lots of thoughts. So I'll answer the most recent question, which was the on the Terror in the Sky, and that was when the Catalina Island team, Michael Hall and David Altman, had spotted an object and alerted us in Laguna Beach. And Jeremy McGowan and Jason Turner took off in Jeremy McGowan's Osiris, which is his mobile unit, and they headed up the coast to try to find this object. And later, it was revealed that the object that was seen by the team in Catalina was the International Space Station. But Jeremy McGowan and Jason Turner, when the Osiris had found another object, which was probably a different object because of this effect, where it was visible in one of the two cameras. So we had a fisheye camera that could, have a wide field of view. And then there was a pan zoom tilt camera that could focus and aim at an object and look at it. And this was all in the UFO DAP system that was mounted on Jeremy's Osiris. And the object, the light, was visible in one camera, but not the other. And this was, this was recorded by the documentary crew. Also recorded this while it was happening. So it was rather confusing. And what I think we later determined was that one of the cameras had more capabilities in the infrared region of the spectrum than the other camera. And so this object was probably visible in the infrared light, but not in visible light. And from what I gather, looking at the imagery here, the fact that it's changing from being a light object to a dark object, depending on the background and such, it looks like that's an infrared image, is what was recorded in the case in Iraq with the jellyfish object.
So let me ask you first, before we dive into just the physics of what we're seeing here, what would you say about the legitimacy of this actual video? Upon seeing it, did you think, yes, this is real and something that could exist?
That's really hard to say. And this is one of the problems of data coming out of the military, and because we don't know what the provenance of the imagery is, we don't know all of the details usually of the events surrounding the encounter. We don't know everything about the equipment that was used to record the imagery, and so it's very hard to assess what's going on here. And in fact, there has to be some concern of the potential for disinformation, because we're dealing with the U.S. government, which has kept these things quiet for 80 years, and is now, there's now discussions going on with the Inspector General about this. So we know that this has been kept quiet for 80 years, and they haven't been forthcoming, and it's not clear whether you can trust the things that are being released by them. This is one reason why having scientists out there recording data with multiple instruments, multiple types of instruments is the best way to approach such a problem.
So assuming that it is legitimate, we'll take all of the other stuff aside, right? Could be government disinformation, could be anybody's government disinformation. Assuming that it is truly something that existed that we have caught on camera, what was your initial thought upon seeing it?
My initial thought when I first saw this, I thought, well, it really looks like something on the camera lens, or if there's a dome covering the lens, it could be something on the dome. However, if you watch it carefully, throughout the course of the video, you'll see that there's a point where the camera zooms out, right, and the object becomes smaller. And if it was schmutz or some dirt on the camera lens or dome, then that wouldn't have become smaller. It would have become blurrier, right? It would have blurred because you would have gone out of focus or changed the focus on that part of the camera. So I don't think that this is something that's on the camera dome or on the camera lens. And I'm sure there's going to be skeptics that suggest that, and that's clearly wrong because of the zooming effect. Also, the the position of the object changes with respect to the reticle, and so it's clearly moving around and being tracked. And so it, the best we can do at this point is the best thing I can do is say that it looks like it's an actual object moving across the visual field. So
Great. And for those of you that are just
sure
joining
interesting.
us,
I mean, it looks a lot like, it reminds me of the Imperial probe droid from Empire Strikes Back on Hoth. I was watching it, and in my mind, I've got running the sound, beep, 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 the sound that the probe droid makes. That's running through my mind when I was first watching this, because that's what it looks kind of like. And I hate to make a connection between something that's purportedly factual and fictional, but that it just really stood out for me.
But our brains reach for something that makes sense, that we have seen before.
Something you're familiar with, at least.
Yeah.
Right.
So for those of you just joining us, sorry, we had some technical difficulties going live to Facebook, but we are on now. We are joined by Dr. Kevin Knuth, who is a physicist, and we are diving into the most recent UAP video that was released. We do love our audience interaction, so if anybody has questions, please do write them in all caps so that we know that it is indeed a question, and we will do our best to get those into the show. And back to this UAP, as a physicist, can you talk to us at all about the actual physics of what we might be seeing with this object?
Yeah, because let me interject this real quick. Another thing they report is that this UAP displayed positive lift, and of course that it was transmedium. So what do you make particularly of those two things?
Yeah, it's not obvious how the object is aloft. That's the first surprise, and that's one of the 5 observables that the ATIP program identified for UAPs, is that you have positive lift without obvious mechanism. And then the second of the 5 observables, a second one of the 5, was the transmedium capabilities, the capability of going from air to water, water to air. And that wasn't recorded on video, but that's reported as being associated with this object. So yeah, so it's extremely interesting. But this is one of those cases where it would have been wonderful to have multiple cameras, multiple types of cameras, be picking up, looking for electric and magnetic fields, measuring, looking at spectra, trying to detect other features that would provide us with more information about what's actually going on here, what the physics or engineering of this object is.
Yes. Could you tell us, what do they mean by positive lift?
Oh, positive lift means that the thing is basically lifted up in the air, or basically held aloft, so like an airplane or a helicopter or a balloon, something like that. Those all experience positive lift. Yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned the droid. When I first showed this to CJ, she pondered about the old story about Russian military forces, constructing like Iron Man type of warriors. And when I showed it to our military consultant, he said, it reminds him of an Iron Man suit, but then I wondered, wow, well, who would actually get in such a suit and fly it over an active military zone? But, I find it really frustrating. I'm sure you do too, that we have so much data that are missing. Like, supposedly it went in the water. Well, where is that? Like, what was the altitude? I mean, how big is this? And the same thing about the orbs. Do we have any way of figuring out how big such an object is, or, just fill in the gaps of some things that are missing?
Yeah, no, that data is either not available or withheld. That's another problem with these military releases. The imagery that's often released is, according to the either pilot descriptions, especially in the case of the 2004 Nimitz encounter, or whoever was describing this event. The imagery that gets released is the most boring part of the encounter. They never release
Right.
the exciting stuff. We don't get to see the object taking off at like a bullet out of a gun, or diving into the water and then coming out at extremely fast. We don't ever get to see these things, and whether that's been recorded or not, you don't actually know. That doesn't get released either. So. And this is another reason why you can't help, as a scientist, you can't help but be suspicious of the military and their intentions, or not the military, but the government and their intentions, because we're only being allowed to see the most boring videos of these things. And that really doesn't help, from my perspective as a scientist, that doesn't help my job, because it doesn't convince my fellow scientists that anything unusual is going on. You don't have any evidence that there's anything unusual going on. And then that's a bit of a problem.
So that's a great segue, unless Tim, you had anything else you wanted to dive into with this UAP?
No, but Kevin, did you have any final thoughts on, and I'll put it back up here real quick for those that might have missed it. Did you have any final thoughts on the Jellyfish UFO?
Yeah, I mean, this part of the video looks rather strange. I mean, well, it's difficult to interpret an infrared video, and so this is an infrared apparently, and because you can't see structures on the object, and it's blurred, and these are all the complaints, and this is when the 3 videos were released earlier, from the Nimitz 2004 event, the gimbal and the Go Fast videos. Skeptics and scientists all complained, oh, they're all blurry. Well, of course they're blurry. It's an infrared video. It's going to be blurry. You don't have this kind of detail in an infrared video. And it was surprising to hear scientists say this, because it made me want to slap them on the head and say, have you ever seen an infrared image? I mean, do you have any experience with this? Because they're blurry. They're going to be blurry. It's heat. You're heating up the air around the object. That air is also going to radiate. It's going to blur the image. Yeah, you get blurry images. That happens. And that happens with other imagery of UFOs too. Photographs that people take in the visible range. There's often blurry. And that's a common complaint that you hear among scientists. But when you dive into the topic and you really study these images closely, you start to realize, well, there's reasons why this is blurry. There's a lot going on here. There's actually a lot of physics going on here, which is interesting, which is leading to this being blurry. A lot of these objects appear to be ionizing the air and creating some kind of plasma sheath around the object. So that blurs the object. Some of them are clearly distorting the background. In the Aguadilla case, where you had the several foot long sized football shaped objects fly over the airfield in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico.
Yes.
When it passes over the parking lot, you can see in the background, you can see the lines for the parking spaces get distorted as they get close to the object, not on the object, but close to it. So this object is distorting the background imagery. And why is that happening? We don't know. That's something I would like to try to study at some point, but it would be nice to have multiple videos of this to study. You could imagine if the object's, in that case, the object's hot. So if the object's hot, you could be heating the air, changing the index of refraction and bending the light that way. Another hypothesis has been that these things might be distorting space-time. You could be creating warp bubbles and things. That's been one. And if that's going on, if there's any kind of gravitational distortion, you're also going to bend the light. And so these objects do cause optical distortions. That's common. And it's not that people just take blurry images of UFOs. No, there's actual physics here, and we can learn things from the physics. I mean, and I find that rather disappointing when I hear scientists say that, because it's like, as a scientist, you should know better. Each one of these effects is a clue as to what's going on, and you should be using these clues to piece together the physics and engineering, rather than just making blanket statements. Oh, they're all blurry, and that's ridiculous.
Well, I just want to say, and by the way, we're talking to Professor Kevin Knuth. You've seen him on Encounters on Netflix. you've seen him on A Terror in the Sky. I rented A Terror in the Sky on Amazon via Gaia. I'm not exactly sure how that worked still exactly, but it worked. And I was also told that you can watch it on the Roku channel, A Terror in the Sky. And
That's where I watched it.
Yes, and
Yeah.
after I rented it, I found out it was for free on Roku channel.
And now you get to hear him on All Things Unexplained.
It was money well spent. I really enjoyed both of them, and he's here with us tonight, and we're so appreciative. I mean, speaking, Dr. Knuth, of your television appearances, I feel like this paper, this scientific paper, launched your television career. I might be wrong, but in 2019, you wrote a little paper called Estimating Flight Characteristics of Anomalous Unidentified Aerial Vehicles. And it is an impressive paper, but you get into the 2004 Nimitz encounters off the coast of California. Can you remind our listeners and us as well, and it would be great to hear in your own words, what happened on the Nimitz?
What happened? I don't know if I can say what happened on the Nimitz, but I can tell you about the speeds and accelerations of the objects that they observed.
Perfect.
Yeah, that paper was, I had started to do those calculations as being a first pass of what I might be able to do as a physicist. So this was 2019 I was published. So I was already working on this in 2018, probably the summer of 2018 or so, or actually probably would have been in the spring. And that's shortly after the ATIP program is revealed in the New York Times article. And I thought, well, as a physicist, what can I actually do? What can I don't have solid data from anybody, but are there cases where I can estimate something from the data? And I realized, especially in the Nimitz case, that there were a few examples where the descriptions of the events were sufficiently detailed that I could at least estimate speeds and accelerations. And so that's what I had started to do. And I had done that, and then I went to the meeting, the SCU meeting, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which was in Huntsville, Alabama. And Robert Powell and Peter Reale had done their own analysis of the 2004 Nimitz encounters. And they were getting similar results that I was. I mean, we were doing the calculations that any scientist ought to be doing. And we agreed, and I realized, I thought, this really just needs to be written up as a scientific paper at this point. We probably can do this. And so I teamed up with them. I didn't want to, especially after having seen their presentation on their work, and I had already done some work and knew that it was similar and I was getting similar results. I thought, well, I can't really go and publish a paper without including them. That would not be cool. So I thought, and in fact, it's better to team up because we can use different techniques and compare and both, check each other's work and all of that. So we teamed up and we wrote this paper. The Nimitz encounter is interesting because you have a few different ways in which the Tic Tac shaped objects were encountered. First, they were observed by Senior Chief Kevin Day, who was a radar operator on the USS Princeton in the Nimitz carrier group. They were located off the coast of Southern California at the time. And Kevin Day had been observing these objects on radar for, I think, a little around 2 weeks. They would drop in. They would appear on his radar at about 80,000 feet. That was basically the ceiling for his radar. And usually in the vicinity of Catalina Island, which is off the coast of Southern California, near Laguna Beach, which is where we filmed A Terror in the Sky. We went back to that location to try to collect data for that reason. But they would appear on his radar at 80,000 feet, drop down to about 28,000 feet, and then they would cruise south along the coast a very slow speed, around 100 knots or so, 120 miles an hour, something like this, which at 28,000 feet, there's not that much air. So an airplane can't fly at 100 miles an hour at that altitude. You fall out of the sky. So the speeds of these objects were way too slow. And that really bothered Kevin Day. He thought, these aren't just airplanes. These are strange things. And eventually, and there were times when they would drop from the 28,000 feet height to sea level, and would do so in about 0.78 seconds. So it would take 3/4 of a second for it to go from 28,000 feet to sea level. That's about 5 miles of height.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
3/4 of a second. That's shocking.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that I can do something with. I know the height. I have some idea of what the errors are going to be. I don't know the precise errors of the equipment, but I can estimate what they probably would be. And I can give you an estimate for the speeds of and accelerations. And if you do that, the accelerations turn out to be about the minimum acceleration. So the minimum acceleration, there's two extremes that could happen. You could instantaneously accelerate to whatever speed you're going to travel, and then travel at that constant speed to the bottom, and then just instantaneously stop. Right now, that's in that case, I could calculate that speed, and so that's one situation. The other situation is that you would accelerate at a constant rate to the midpoint and then decelerate at the same rate, just stopping at the bottom. And that gives you the minimum acceleration. And I thought, well, that's the most useful thing to estimate, because then I can confidently say these things at least had to accelerate at this rate. And we know this, and it's indisputable. I mean, it'll be indisputable. So I thought this is the solid thing to calculate. And if you do this, that acceleration is about 5,600 Gs. Is the mean acceleration. So that's 5,000 times the acceleration of gravity.
Goodness.
People aren't going to survive this. People can't survive more than about 11 Gs for anything over a few milliseconds. Our equipment can't survive this. An F-35 fighter will have its wings ripped off at about 13.5 Gs. Missiles can survive a bit higher accelerations. They can maneuver up to about 30 Gs, and the airframes can handle maybe 60 Gs, but that's it. I mean, but we're talking, these Tic Tacs were accelerating at minimum 5,600 Gs. They could
Can I
have
ask
been
you something about
accelerating-
that?
I'm sorry?
Can I ask you something about that, Professor Knuth?
Yeah, of course.
What does that tell you about the mass of these objects?
That it's not clear at all what's going on. You aren't going to be able to accelerate a physical object at those rates in the conventional sense, because you're just going to break all the equipment inside. You'll be destroying the craft, which clearly isn't happening. So that's already very strange. So the point of the paper basically is to highlight that, given what was observed, this is clearly anomalous. We don't have an explanation for what's going on. The other main point is that if you're going to accelerate halfway and then decelerate, that means at the midpoint, you're going to be moving at your highest speed. And you can estimate what that speed is. And that turns out to be about 45,000 miles an hour. Now,
casual.
Now, our orbiting spacecraft, the space station orbits at about 17,000 miles an hour. So when the space shuttles would come in, or Apollo would come back in, after a trip to the moon, you're coming in around 17,000 miles an hour. And you're a fireball.
Right. Burning up. Yeah.
Fireball. Sonic booms, fireballs, the whole works, all the histrionics of the interactions with the air. The Tic Tacs weren't doing anything like this. There were no fireballs. There's no sonic booms. Nothing. And then as a physicist, you worry about other things. Where does all this energy come from? How much power did it take to do this? Where did the energy go when it stopped? Energy doesn't, as it's moving and it's going 45,000 miles an hour at the midpoint, which, by the way, is the speed of the New Horizons probe that passed Pluto in 2015. That's moving 45,000 miles an hour. That's how fast the Tic Tacs were going, which is shocking. But where does that energy go? It should then, what is it? Half of 3/4 of a second later, 3/8 of a second later, it just comes to a dead stop. That energy had to go somewhere. We tried to estimate that energy. The Tic Tacs were estimated to be the size of an F-18, and we took the mass.
Okay.
We took the mass of the F-18 and then divided by a factor of 10. Say, let's pretend that the Tic Tacs were 10 times less massive than the F-18, just to get try to be a little more reasonable, because what's going on is shocking. And if you do that, the power it would have taken to make that maneuver was something like 1,300 gigawatts of power. That's way more than the nuclear power output of the United States.
What?
Yes. In the little Tic Tac the size of an F-18. Doesn't make any sense. How much energy got released when it stopped? That would have been about 250 Tomahawk cruise missiles going off at once. That should have been dissipated somewhere. The energy has to go somewhere. Wasn't observed, right?
Yeah, and we're seeing none of that.
You're seeing none of that. So these things are anomalous in many, many ways. The speeds and accelerations are anomalous. The lack of interacting with the air is anomalous. There's no sonic booms, no fireballs. The energy just seemed to appear and disappear. We don't know where the energy is coming from or going. So that was really the point of the paper, is to highlight that these things are really anomalous. This is not normal anything going on here.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for sharing that, because I think just as a casual observer, you just see things in the sky and you go, oh, okay, that does seem different. So to get that whole physics perspective of it is really important. I do want to take now your physics perspective.
Maybe I can add one thing quickly.
Yes, please.
That's relevant. The other question that came up is, are they spacecraft, right? Are these things really spaceships? And I just had a collapse of all my papers.
Uh-oh.
I'll deal with that later. And no problem. So it was precariously balanced.
I hope you didn't need those in order
Yeah,
to
that's the
publish
next year's
tonight.
worth of papers right there.
It'll be fine. All right, so the question is, are they spacecraft? Well, I've already mentioned that they move, at least in that example, was moving as fast as the New Horizons probe. But at thousands of Gs of acceleration, you can get to extremely high speeds pretty quickly if you can keep that up, right? So in the case of the Nimitz encounter, it would have only been accelerating for 3/8 of a second. But if you can keep that acceleration up for 17 hours, you'll be going 90% the speed of light.
Oh man, which would make, of course, time travel,
which
or
gives you
travel.
interstellar capabilities,
Right?
Really, because you're moving at relativistic speed, so time is going to go slower for you. And at that acceleration, you can get across the galaxy in about 3 months.
What?
Your time. Across the galaxy, 3 months, traveler's time. Not the time.
Okay.
For the people everybody in the galaxy sees it will take about 80,000 years.
Okay.
But for you, the traveler, it'll take about 3 months. It's a 3-month trip.
This is where that movie Interstellar blew my mind, was the space-time continuum and learning about how
time is not the same for everybody.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, I look at the speed of light so differently now. When I heard somebody speculate that, if we are living in a simulation, then the speed of light might be the boundary that keeps us all in the simulation. Right.
Interesting.
And so,
that's okay.
What if it's the creators of the simulation that, of course, can escape that boundary, but they're the only ones that can. But anyway,
and it's tough because our theoretical paper that were published, that I'm submitting tonight, is in there we show that there has to be a maximum speed. You can
Yeah.
actually prove there has to be a maximum speed, which is interesting because when Einstein derived relativity, that derivation depends on the assumption that the speed of light is constant for all observers. And instead, we're able to derive relativity and also independently show that the speed of light is constant for all observers and maximal.
Well, let me ask a
So it's
mathematical
interesting.
question there. So one of the things I love, one of the pieces of mathematics I love is we can't really fathom what it means to do something like approach infinity, for example, but mathematically it happens. But what that means in reality is not so easy to understand. So when you do the mathematics on something like that, do the mathematics show it reaching or exceeding the speed of light, or does it show it approaching this limit, which is the speed of light, but never quite reaching it? What does it show on
So
that?
the mathematics shows you can approach it as a limit, but not exceeding. Yeah.
The speed of light.
Right.
Okay, and when you say maximum speed, you say there has to be a maximum speed.
Which I
you
don't
mean
like
for
using the phrase speed of light. It's unfortunately we call that the speed of light, because it leads to some confusion, because light can slow down when it goes through medium. When light goes through my glasses, it slows down. Right.
Okay.
So the speed of light's not, and light gets bent by gravity. So gravity is also changing the speed of light. So that's a bit confusing. But what we in special relativity call the speed of light is better called the maximal speed. It's a
Okay.
maximal speed.
So just to clarify for my brain, you are essentially saying that anything in the universe, there is obviously a maximum speed that no matter what technology you have, you cannot go beyond this hypothetical speed.
By moving. Let me be careful. Moving. No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Warp bubbles and things like that are a different ballgame, because you're not
Okay.
not moving in a conventional sense.
Gotcha.
So that's a different ballgame.
I would
But
be
if you're
remiss.
talking about motion, then there's a maximum speed, and the reason is because space and time are related to each other.
Right.
When you're 4 light years away from Alpha Centauri, you're 4 years away from Alpha Centauri, and that there's a relationship between the two, and that's why there's maximum speed.
And it all goes back to the math, right? The math says you can't do it. And so as far as we know, we can't do it. But I would be remiss, Dr. Knuth, if I didn't ask you, do you have any theories or wild speculation or favorite conjecture for the nature of these Tic Tac anomalies?
I don't. They have to be. They're not moving in a conventional sense. They're not moving in the way that we think of in terms of Galileo and Newton, or even Einstein relativistic motion. I mean, the accelerations are way too high. You'd destroy the insides of the craft. So whatever they are, it wouldn't work. So they're doing something totally different. Whether they have a warp bubble and are moving through a warp bubble like an Alcubierre warp drive or a version of that, or whether they're teleporting in some way, maybe bunches of little teleportations. I mean, at this point, I'm only making things up and guessing, but that's only because they can't be doing it the conventional way.
So I want to take all of this physics that we've discussed and bring it back to sort of the human experience of what happened on the Nimitz and the correlation between what happened there and what happened on the Maelstrom Air Force Base. So from watching A Terror in the Sky, I learned a little bit more about what happened to some of these people who observed these Tic Tacs. And the one gentleman, I think you mentioned him earlier, it sort of ruined his life. He was tormented by his peers
Kevin
and
Day,
colleagues. Yeah, and also somebody came on that ship and took all of the video footage and left.
That's
the
the
same thing
point
happened at Maelstrom.
That's the point that gets, and that happened at Maelstrom too. I wasn't aware of that, but I'm not surprised.
Yes. At Maelstrom, the day after it happened, the black suits came in there. They separated every single person and pretty much said, you face life in prison if you speak about this to anyone, not to your family and friends, to anybody that is here, anybody that works here, anybody else that saw it. Nobody is to speak of this event ever again, or we will ruin your lives.
I mean, this is a story that keeps coming up, and this is the type of threats that Grush has talked about to Congress under oath, and it's a problem. This is democracy, and
so I guess my question is,
right, yeah.
I just got really heated about that. Why? What do you think is the why behind the government's reasoning for taking all of this information and keeping it secret?
That's tough. There are probably multiple reasons, and some of them are not very good, but are practical, and others are better than others. I think that, so this has been kept quiet for. I don't like using the word secret because it invokes the idea of a conspiracy theory, which then you're blamed for, you're accused of being a conspiracy theorist. I don't think it requires a conspiracy to keep this quiet. You really only have to make fun of it at some point, and everybody giggles and forgets about it because it makes people uncomfortable. So it doesn't take a lot to keep this quiet. And in these events, these specific events like Malmstrom or the Nimitz encounters, all you have to do is threaten a few people and they'll stay quiet. So, I was pointing out in another podcast recently, they asked me about Roswell, and I pointed out that the sheriff had gone out and independently investigated the area, and the military detained him for 5 days and questioned him and threatened him. Why? Well, good question.
That's hard to explain over a weather balloon, by the way.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, they changed their story from a weather balloon to something else. So that means they lied about the weather balloon. So the government has lied repeatedly in that situation. And I often point out that the only story that's actually believable is the first one, which was put out the day after it was discovered, and the government quashed it, right? But the local Air Force base put out the story that they recovered a disc. And that's probably the correct story.
Yeah. It's like the real version
lied
of
about the weather
Black.
balloon. They lied about dropping dummies. We know they lied about all these things because they later are saying, Project Mogul or what. I don't know what the current excuse is. But they have a whole string of explanations at this point, which means that the previous ones were lies. So they're admitting to lies all the time. Why are they lying? I don't know. I don't exactly know why they're lying. There's of course the potential concern about if there's a non-human intelligence involved, and our inability to defend against it if that becomes necessary. Those are two reasons for potentially having a lie, and potentially covering this up or keeping it quiet. Another would be wanting access to the technology. You want access to the technology. You don't want another country to get the technology before you do. And the third reason for keeping it quiet. There has been suspicion among people who have seriously looked at this that there is a bigger secret. Because I think the general feeling is that those reasons for keeping this quiet for 80 years aren't quite enough, and that there's something more dramatic happening that nobody has the answer to. And I'm starting to wonder if that's the situation.
Thanks. Like, share, follow, comment, subscribe, support. What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
All things unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.